I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. This is how our underground man begins his confession. I read that Dostoevsky intended this confession to be a critique of rational egoism, the idea that we as humans are not rational, no matter how much we try to insist that we are. We all tell ourselves that we want to be happy, and yet we have a really unique and special talent for making ourselves utterly miserable. And so the underground man's confession reveals his solution: chaos. Like, genuinely, I think he tries to be the biggest twat he can possibly get away with to as many people as he possibly can. Like, that is his solution to rational egoism, to be an irrational twat. And of course, the chaos that he preaches turns into suffering and misery and self-loathing. But maybe that's the point, to take something rational and well-ordered and then to just completely mess it up, because what else can we do as humans? It is simply our human nature to be irrational. I mean, in the first half of the book, he admits to being resentful, he admits to being bitter, he knows that he is, and yet he takes his rational thought process and just seemingly throws it in the bin. He calls himself intelligent, he likes his intelligence, and yet he only uses it to make himself suffer. He views everybody else as stupid and simple with pointless aims, and yet he feels the need to be accepted by them. His confession in the first half of the book serves as a precursor to the stories that we're about to get into, but you really get to see his resentful nature and that his misery is a product of his intellect. He is an embodiment of his philosophy. He is hyper-rational, he understands his situation, and yet he cannot save himself. Instead, he is either riddled with inaction or is destined to self-destruct. Welcome to the Philos Library. My name is Owen, and today we will be exploring Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky. Before we begin, I would strongly encourage everyone to read the book for themselves, as this video will be summarizing the entire storyline. So, spoilers. If you want to learn how to destroy your life piece by piece, this is the book for you. Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground is the ultimate illustration of how not to live your life. We're introduced to the underground man, who is genuinely the most resentful character I've ever come across. In the first half of the book, we get to see his confession. It's like seeing inside the mind of a nihilist. We see his resentment for everyone and everything, including even himself. He's like the ultimate black-pilled incel, reveling in his own despair. He attributes his suffering to his heightened intelligence. He can see the world for how it really is. He sees the truth. And whilst this does make him better than everyone, he is destined for a life of isolated suffering and misery. Rather than using his intellect to fix his life, he just justifies his position over and over and over again. You really get to see how his broken philosophy has messed up his entire life. In the second half of the book, we're taken back in time to when the underground man was 24 years old. He walks us through 3 short stories, and we really get to see his philosophy in action. Like, seriously, the only way I can really describe it is like watching someone try to mess up their own life and make everyone else as uncomfortable and as miserable as they possibly can. And of course, our underground man is the enlightened intellectual. He can justify all of his actions. Everyone else is just a stupid doer, too simple to think about, let alone understand the complexity of life the way he does. As we move into the second half of the book, we begin the narrative tales, and these open up to an atmosphere much the same as the confession, with the underground man again in his own head and again deeping life. We're taken back to when he's 24 years old, and the underground man is already a social outcast, looking down upon those he works with and seeing enemies where simply none exist. He is at face value just an average man working an ordinary civil service job. One evening, taking a routine late night stroll, he turns the corner and sees what I can only assume is a typical scene in 1816 Russian nightlife. A drunk being kicked out of the bar for having a fight. Naturally, the need for chaos seeps in. Even suffering is better than idleness for our underground man, and so, fueled by his self-destruction and inspired by the drunk man, he enters the bar looking for somebody, anybody to bother. The underground man would rather risk harm to himself than remain idle with nothing but his own thoughts. I'm sure at some stage we've all wanted to get away from our own thoughts. As the cliche goes, the mind is a great servant but a terrible master. It is very much a rational feeling. So of course, here comes the chaos. Upon entering the bar, he finds an officer and stands in his way, intending to impose himself. The officer doesn't even notice him, inadvertently taking the moral high ground and, in the underground man's own words, treats him as if he were a fly. He can neither believe nor accept the disrespect. He readies his tongue, prepared to unleash a barrage of sophisticated insults. But then he realizes where he is. A bar, surrounded by the common man, too stupid to understand the eloquence of his disparagement. With no other option, he bites his tongue, has an internal strop, and furiously, defiantly, but silently, retreats. He returns to his underground isolation and plots his revenge. He plans and deliberates for months and months, pages and pages and pages of the book. He borrows money to buy an outfit for the occasion. He stalks the officer's location. He is ready to restore his honor. Eventually, he unveils his master plan: to intentionally bump into him. Yes, to bump into him. And somehow it gets worse. When the time comes to execute his masterpiece, again, the officer doesn't even notice him and simply carries on by. For some reason, and I'm not exactly sure why, the underground man viewed this as a victory. He was jubilant that he had avenged himself, despite admitting that he came off the worst and was a weaker man in general. It doesn't really make much sense to me. 3 days later, the underground man decides it is time to humiliate himself in front of an old group of friends. He admits to himself that he needs the occasional social interaction, and so he imposes himself on an acquaintance he went to school with called Simonov. On a whim, he shows up to this poor guy's flat where Simonov and several others are planning a send-off for one of their friends, Zherkov. He barges his way into their conversation, and despite the mutual dislike between the underground man and his acquaintances, he assumes he is already invited to their send-off meal. The group obviously doesn't want him to be there, but they eventually cave when the underground man continuously begs to be invited and makes it extremely awkward. Having received the invite, he now has to pay for the reservation. He is already indebted to Simonov and has no money, and so in order to pay for the reservation, the underground man is forced to withhold his servants' monthly wages. Remember, he not only doesn't like these people, he actively despises them and considers himself superior in every way. He even calls Zherkov a rotten swine. Even he knows he shouldn't go, but he just can't help himself. He considers cancelling, but in his own words, the more inappropriate it was to go, the more certain it was that he would. He has done all of this to gain validation from people he considers his inferior, and who he does not enjoy spending time with, not that he enjoys spending time with anyone. Why does he want to go? Precisely because he knows it is the wrong thing to do. Unsurprisingly, on the day of the send-off, everyone decides it'd be better if he weren't at the pre-drinks, leaving him at the bar alone. He sits at the table for an hour, letting his resentment grow and begins reveling in it. When they arrive, he is ready to unleash hell. He sits there, neglected, crushed and humiliated, thinking about how he ought to leave without saying a word, how he ought to duel Zherkov, but instead he sits, and of course he stays, and of course he does nothing. He starts drinking and becomes increasingly angry. His goal for the night remains to be seen as intellectually superior, to be recognized as the hyper-conscious individual he is. In his own words, he needs to find the right moment to show them who he is, to make them say, he may be ridiculous, but he's damned clever. Whilst this is all happening inside his head, the others are having a great time, forgetting all about him. Remember, he envies men of action. He calls them foolish, stupid, and useless, yet he needs them to validate his intellect and to recognize him as the hyper-conscious individual he thinks he is. He believes he is the main character. The underground man decides to interrupt their fun. He stands up and makes a toast. He insults Zverkov, challenges Fifichkin to a duel, and is then laughed at and shamed. And so, to get his revenge, and as a noble act of defiance and courage, he remains silent for 3 hours. We again see his inability to act. He grabs a bottle of champagne intending to throw it at the others, but instead pours himself another glass. Throughout the evening, the underground man remains caught up in his own head, pacing back and forth alone, trying with all his might to prove that he could do without them. Finally, at 11 PM, after 3 hours, the group decides to leave for another venue. As the others are barging past him to leave, the underground man abruptly and pathetically apologizes for insulting Zverkov and begs to continue the night with them. Zverkov laughs in his face, saying, "Offended me? You offended me? Let me tell you, my dear sir, that you could never, in any circumstance, offend me." They move past him, and with one final act of toe-curling desperation, he asks Simonov to borrow some money so that he can come with them. Simonov hurls the money at him, declaring that he can have it if he has so little shame. And so our underground man declares that he'll follow them. He states, either they should all kneel before me, embracing me and begging for my friendship, or I'll give Zverkov a slap in the face. With the bitterness and doom of the dinner party still fresh in his mind, the underground man makes his way to the brothel to deliver his slap. Upon arriving, he finds that they have already left, and so he is left pacing around alone, rambling to himself once again. It is then that he has his final encounter in these tales, perhaps one of the only people in a more desperate position than himself, a prostitute named Liza. The story cuts to the underground man waking up in bed with her, presumably having had an intimate encounter. Despite both of them being in personal struggles, the underground man rips Liza's future to shreds, drawing parallels to a prostitute that recently died at the same brothel. He confronts her with images of her eventual decaying beauty and the lonely death that may follow. Despite some initial reluctance from Liza, he eventually convinces her, and she becomes engaged with his philosophy, developing a trauma bond. He admits to sharing feelings for her, and that if she were to improve her situation, something could happen between them. The underground man finally has someone whom he can lecture and feel superior to. He believes he is able to take on Liza's issues and become the hero of the story and take control of her destiny, even at the loss of her autonomy. This may be making up for his own inability to affect his own life. The underground man is certainly not in a position to be lecturing on how to act to secure a strong future. However, his ego will not allow him to realize this, and so he takes joy in his intelligence being recognized. Having left her the address to his apartment, he is suddenly filled with embarrassment at his situation. His messy, poverty-stricken living situation threatens to expose him as a man of inaction. It is amidst this background that Liza arrives. Perhaps out of embarrassment, fear of positive action, or attachment to the hatred that has followed him around his entire life, he barrages her with insults and takes back everything that was said before. This culminates in him crashing out and, like always, he has a moment of lucidity where he admits to only seeking to maintain power over her and to inflict humiliation and pain upon those around him. This quickly turns into self-loathing as he laments at his position. The situations have reversed as it is now Liza comforting him as he weeps at his poverty and nature. The underground man rejects his last chance of salvation. Despite just crying on her shoulder, he makes his final, most bitter and most irrational outburst yet, cementing his hopeless future of underground isolation. He hurls money at her as a grave insult to her status as a prostitute, betraying her trust and violating the advice and support he gave her previously. She leaves, and despite trying to find her again, the underground man never can. Like others afflicted by heartbreak, he can only spend his time fantasizing about the situation. In the end, the inner turmoil has broken the underground man and left him no better than those he despises around him. We have now reached the end of this tale. Dostoevsky used the underground man to illustrate what a resentful life can do to someone, and to implicitly deliver his own worldview that a materialistic philosophy will lead to misery and despair. We can see in the underground man the problems which Dostoevsky was interested in solving. Notes from the Underground is a great introduction to existentialist philosophy and delivers a secondary benefit of helping you uncover some of the darker thoughts that you may have been harboring. We would like to thank everyone who has listened to this point, and we would love to hear your thoughts on this novel and suggestions for any future videos.